It's been a year since I went to Ciudad de Mexico for my follow-up to my UVISA process. I wanted to give you guys an update. And those of you that are new to my channel, just kind of give you guys a backstory of where my UVISA process began, where we're at, and where we're headed with it. So, as you guys know, I was deported almost 6 years ago as an aggravated felon for committing crimes of moral turpitude while I was a green card holder. So I got deported in February 2018. I was deported with a lifetime bar, which means that I can never return to the U.S. That's what I was told. When we went to court, that's what was communicated to me by my ICE agent. So when I got deported, I never really had any I want to go back to the U.S. because I felt like I can't. I'll never be able to go back. And so it was never really something that I gave much energy to until I began my journey on TikTok. And I came across, or a couple of attorneys came across my story and they reached out to me. So you guys know I started my TikTok account in May 2021 is when I went viral and I started getting a large following, a lot of questions, and I started sharing my story, bits and pieces from the deportation to the drama with my ex and the custody and how I got my kids over here and what I did for work. And it's been 3 years, almost 3 years since. And so since then, a lot of things have happened. Including last year, you guys know that I took a trip to the U.S. Embassy in Ciudad de Mexico, and a lot of people were speculating what I was doing there because it happened right after the DV. So let me start from the beginning.
Yeah. Survey on the beat, boy.
Right, so I got deported in 2018 with a lifetime bar as an aggravated felon. Now, one of the questions that I read into a lot is, why didn't you go back illegally, right? Well, number one, because as an aggravated felon, if I re-enter illegally, I am subject to a mandatory prison sentence of 4 years. That was enough for me to be like, that's enough for me, dog. I didn't want to be living in the shadows, and frankly, it would be impossible for me to do so having children. I may be able to slide under the radar if it was just me, but I got deported because somebody reported me to ICE, right? So if I went back illegally, that same person would probably report me again. I would end up back in prison and I'd have to start over from scratch. And so when I got deported, my mentality was always like, this is it. This is a new start. I'm going to start fresh. I don't have the labels. I'm no longer a felon. I'm not this. This is a new opportunity to do things right. And so my energy was always focused on rebuilding here. From getting a job, a car, an apartment. Now I got to get custody of my kids, to transition us back over here together. So I came across a law firm by the name of the Gig Law. I'll tag him here. Came across one of my TikToks where I was, speaking about why I got deported as a green card holder, why I committed my felonies, etc. And they're like, hey, we would love to chat with you just to kind of get some backstory to your case because you may be eligible for a UVISA. So I had a consultation with this law firm. And once I showed them everything that I had, from documents to receipts, and initially when I got picked up by ICE, my plan had been to file for a UVISA. Those circumstances changed because I was not giving access to bond, meaning that if I filed for a UVISA while I was in the custody of ICE, I would have to remain in jail through the course of those proceedings, which can take years. And I wasn't willing. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to stay in jail for years, right? So when I sat down with this law firm, they gave me a very thorough case evaluation. They were very honest with me. And once I presented everything to them, that's when they said, you have a case. We believe in your case. We believe in your story. And we'd like to take this on for you pro bono. So I was giving, honestly, the opportunity of a lifetime. There's probably a lot of you guys that have experience with the immigration system, and you know that these things are very costly. Tens and thousands and 20s of thousands of dollars for a law firm to take on this type of a case specifically, because it would be a difficult one with a deportation order. We have the felonies, the UVISA process. And so they took my case on pro bono. And that was the only reason why I decided to look into returning to the U.S. Because other than that, I had just kind of made peace with it that, I'm never going to go back and that's fine. But the fact that they believed in my case enough to take it on pro bono made me feel like, damn, maybe there is hope for me to return despite being an aggravated felon. One thing about courts is, and especially immigration law, is there's so many loopholes that you don't know of until you speak with an attorney. And I think there was some incentive to them taking my case as well, because if they could get me, a deported felon, back into the U.S., imagine the doors that would open for other people like me to come to them for services, right? That's kind of my thinking behind it. But also, I believe that they were genuine lawyers. They're not just out for money. And, if my case hadn't been, if it had been something like, oh, yeah, we'll take it on, but for this much, then I would maybe, I don't think I would have done it. I wouldn't have applied for the visa. So anyway, we applied sometime in 2021. I was given the expectations that it's going to take about 4 years, this and that. We got to get this approval. The first step to your UVISA is getting a certification from the police department that you were the victim of a qualifying crime and that you assisted law enforcement in the prosecution of said crime. And so getting that certification, that UVISA certification from the police department, was a huge win for us because not everybody gets it. And sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes police stations lose records, or they don't want to sign, or they put it off for a while. So luckily for us, we were able to get it within a few months. And once we have that UVISA certification, then we can file. I don't remember the exact date of when we filed, but I know that it's been a few years. Now, I actually traveled down to the embassy last year, right after I had an incident of DV. And a lot of people were speculating on what I was doing, why I had gone to the embassy, what exactly that meant for my new visa. So I actually got my appointment for my fingerprints in Ciudad de Mexico right after the DV. And I don't know if that was a coincidence. I don't know if that was just God's perfect timing. But I was in Playa del Carmen last year, kind of running from what was happening here in Vallarta with the whole DB case. And I got an email from my attorney, and she was like, I need you to Ciudad de Mexico in a week. And I was like, what? In a week? Like, how? And I didn't understand, what was going on, the importance of it. And, she said, we have your appointment. And you have to do this, you have to do that. And so on a whim, I had to make arrangements for my kids. And I flew into Ciudad de Mexico on Halloween weekend. So it's been like exactly a year since they took my fingerprints. Now, part of that process also, we filed additional paperwork. So when you are in the process of a U visa, it takes a few years for it to get approved or to get looked at. And for me, when I was going through the DV last year, there were some things happening here in Vallarta that put me at imminent risk, me and my children, and I did fear for my safety. And so we were able to present that to the court. So last year, when I went to Ciudad de Mexico, I got my fingerprints. I went to the U.S. Embassy, and they took my picture. They took that solidified. That was the last piece that we needed to submit, and then we sent in additional information as well. There was a few things, like comments that people were making during that time of my DV, that I needed that person that had assaulted me to get convicted for it to do anything to my U visa, which is actually incorrect. You don't need the person, if you were the victim of a crime in Mexico while you're awaiting, your U visa process, or if something happens in Mexico where you're at risk, it could even be like a health issue. Like, let's say I got terminally ill and I was relying on, access to the U.S. to be able to get, life-saving procedures that could be pushed through my U visa. If something happens, in my case, victim of a DV, where our lives are at risk, that can push it through as well. And so at this point, it's now 2023. I think it's been like 2 years, 2.5 years since we filed. And the typical turnaround time for U visas is 4 years in the current administration when we filed. Now, I know that there's been a lot of stuff that's happened since. I think we got a new president. Did we? Or did y'all? I don't know if I can remember. All I know is there's about 2 years left since, for me to get a projected answer of my new visa. And so what does that mean for us? And a lot of you constantly ask me, like, would you ever move back to the U.S.? And, I think my answer would have been very different when we initially filed for it, where I'd be like, yeah, I would return for this and for that. But now I feel like, I don't know, man, like, it's been almost 6 years. Well, first of all, what would it mean if, once my U visa is approved, what happens then? So we would have to move back to the U.S. pretty quickly. And then once we were in the U.S., if I ever leave, it's not guaranteed that I would be able to, get back in with that U visa. So I would have to stay in the US for a minimum of 3 years before I could file for my residency. And then once my residency is approved, then I can travel back and forth, but I cannot be outside of the US for more than 6 months of the year. And then once I've obtained my residency in 5 years, I can apply for citizenship. And so once I have citizenship, then I'm free. Then I'm free to come and go, to live in Mexico, to live there, to go everywhere. And so once I get my U visa, I have to spend like a minimum of 8 years inside the US living there full time. And that to me is very daunting because I don't feel free. I feel like returning to the US on a U visa would be putting myself back in shackles. I would still be a felon. I would have to start from scratch. My credit is still shit. The life that I have here, I don't think I would be able to obtain it in the US, at least not in this short amount of time. Like, it only took me 3-4 years for me to own a home, own a vehicle, paid off, cash only. A lot of things that are really difficult at this day and age in the US, especially now with the cost of living. The government, like the US is kind of going through it right now. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I've gotten to a point. This is what I see for myself. And maybe I won't know until, that day comes and it's time to cross that bridge. I see myself wanting to return to the US to visit, to go to my childhood home, maybe even to just say goodbye to the US because my deportation was very traumatic, just kind of getting ripped out and thrown over the border. And, 6 years later, a lot of things have changed back home. A lot of my siblings don't live in Utah anymore. My mom is going to be leaving Utah soon. And so if I was ever to return to the US, like it would never be the same as when I was there before my deportation. Everything will have changed, evolved, not necessarily for in a good way. You know what I mean? So I could return, but it wouldn't be returning to my old life. And I think that's what I would expect. And I would come across a lot of disappointment when I realized that that's not what it would be. So why return? I have a longing to go back, to visit, to maybe, cerrar ciclo, something like that. Spin the block a couple times, if you will. But I don't have a desire anymore to return to live. And I don't see it as home anymore. Like in moments I do when I think about memories and this and that. But I used to, when I used to talk about the States, I would say back home. When I go home, when we get to go home. Now when I say home, I think of TV because our roots are so deep within here now, from my home to my business, children's school. My family is able to come. My family comes multiple times a year. I'm able to see all my family members that live in the States have, come to visit us. And that's definitely a blessing that I have that a lot of deported people don't have. Many people that are deported leave family members behind that are undocumented, and so they don't see them for years. A lot of deported people like myself lose access to their children, right? So a lot of the components of my story aren't the norm. I have my children. I have access to my family. I was able to build a stable lifestyle. I own our home. I own our vehicle. I can sustain a better quality of life here than I ever had in the US. So do I really want to return? But then there's another part of me that feels like, damn, this is an opportunity I was given that a lot of people don't have. A lot of people can't afford to fight for their case, can't afford an attorney. I was presented with one pro bono, and so if I get my U visa and I don't return to live there, I will feel like, am I taking that for granted? Something that other people would die for, to be able to return after deportation. I have a friend, very similar case to mine, minus felonies. She was deported for 10 years. She got her U visa 10 years later, and she moved her entire family back, right? So when they got deported, she had children, her husband followed her, and they rebuilt a life in Mexico. And she, filed for her case 10 years later. She was approved 10 years later for her U visa, and they moved back to Utah. And, she expresses like it's not the same. She expresses they want to come back. Life is just different up there. They can't afford as much as they could down here. Those types of things that I think I would run into. Once you lived out of the U.S., you just see it through a different lens. And I don't longer feel like the U.S. is the best place to live. And initially, I wanted to return because I thought that was the best place for my children. Like I'm taking opportunities from them by bringing them down here, but 6 years later, I honestly feel like I have given them a better quality of life than I could have ever given them in the US. And the only thing that is in the US that is not down here for us now is family. But even then, we are blessed and we have access to those family members. They can come, they can go. I just hosted my daughter's quinceañera, and our entire family was able to come down. So I don't know. Like I always say this, like I won't know what decision I'll make until it's time to cross that bridge. But until then, like I'm focused here. I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about my U visa. Like a lot of people constantly ask me, like, "Where's your U visa at? How's it going? How's the status?" I don't think about it much. Like I have to really like do the math. Like how long has it been since we applied? How long do we have left? I don't really know because I'm so focused here. I live here. Like I see longevity here in Mexico. I don't see it in the U.S. anymore. I don't look back and think like home. I look here and I think home. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's my little update. I will keep you guys posted on this journey. Those of you that are new and are just chiming in, there's a couple of videos that you'll see at the end of this video that you can watch to catch up on from my trip to the embassy last year, to a couple lives that I did with these immigration attorneys that kind of gives you, some light. And I think above all, part of my pursuit of this visa is to light the way home for other people like me, because there's other people like me that haven't been able to build the sustainable, haven't been able to build what I have here. There's other people like me that have children in the US that have a desire or a need to return. And so I always think to myself, like, my case is the example of if I can do it, you can do it. If me, I constantly get told, oh, she's nothing but a deported felon. Okay. Well, if a deported felon could do it, you could do it. If a deported felon with the odds stacked could do it, you can do it. So the day my U visa gets approved, I think that's really what it will be. It will be a beacon of light and hope for other people in the same situation. For people maybe that are being held in ICE custody to think, what, I need to stick this out. Now in hindsight, I do think I should have filed. And I do think that signing my deportation order as soon as I did was a mistake. I think I had other options, but at the time, the desperation cornered me, and that's the route that I took. And, I was able to make something good out of something really traumatic, but that's not the case for everybody. So anyway, that's all I got for y'all, besties. Drop your comments below. Any questions you guys have on the U visa. Now, I'm not an immigration attorney, so anytime you guys ask me, well, hey, I have a family member with this, I always tell you, go get a consultation. A lot of them do free consultations. I know my attorneys hosted a lot of free consultations with people that were referred for my platform. Every case is different. No case is the same. And so there's not a way to know, like, well, if it worked for her, it could work for you. All I can tell you is that when I went into that meeting with my attorneys, I didn't expect anything out of it. I expected them to tell me what I already knew. You have a felon with a lifetime bar, and, that's as far as we can go for you. But it wasn't. And I was very surprised. I'm still to this day surprised, and above all, regardless of what happens with my U visa, to me, it was very healing to be able to present my case to the immigration courts, for them to hear my side of the story. Because when I went through everything, when I was apprehended by ICE, I didn't give myself that opportunity. One, because I was too weak emotionally. I was too broken. I didn't have the strength to fight it. And, I didn't have the time to sit in jail to be able to present my case to the judge. So I always told myself, regardless of what happens, knowing that I got to petition for this, knowing that I got to explain my life, my story, my choices, far more than just those felonies on paper than what they saw, that to me is healing. And I'll be able to pass it on to my children. Like, look, this is what happened to us. It will give me some type of closure, to be able to explain to my children why we live here, what happened. And although at the time I feel like I was robbed of the ability to do this and to do that, I was able to do it years later. And this was the final outcome. And so now they'll know. Now we all have some type of closure. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's all I got for today, besties.